Hey folks, so today I thought I'd try a little something different. We'll do a bit of a video blog today, tell you a little bit about myself. So hi folks, I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. And today I'm going to try to mix things up a bit, try something new, see how it goes, give you a bit of my background, tell you a bit about myself. I mean, some of it you can get just by reading the information on the Doug Secular Dharma page, so I won't sort of go over that stuff, but, you know, sort of more about what's motivating me here, because I do think that the teachings are so important. But, you know, we all come from our own backgrounds. You know, when I was growing up, I was very introverted, very much sort of a loner type, interested in books and reading, and I still am that way. Mostly I read nonfiction, and the only fiction that I really tend to read when I do read fiction is science fiction. That's been true for me for a long time. I did read some fantasy, you know, Tolkien stuff when I was younger. But the funny thing is that when it comes to doing fiction, I was always sort of more interested in writing it almost than I was in reading it. And so I did a lot of creative writing when I was in school. And at times during my life, I've picked it up again, in particular trying to write some science fiction, you know, several years ago. It's kind of funny because it was science fiction that got me back into Buddhism. I had studied Buddhism for a long time and practiced it for a long time, but when I was in graduate school and doing philosophy, we were forced in philosophy to really come to terms with what the views were of the particular schools that we were studying. And so I was studying Buddhism, along with other things, along with a lot of Western philosophy, and had to come to terms with issues about rebirth, issues about karma, and so on. And rather than just sort of brushing those under the rug, when I started thinking about them, I realized I really couldn't make sense of them for myself. And so, as a result, that kind of study turned me off of Buddhism, along with some other studies that I was doing at the same time, of Tibetan Buddhism, issues of Madhyamika, and so on, which probably don't interest a lot of you guys, but it's more philosophy of later Buddhism. And I sort of as a result, put it behind me for a long time, for several years. But interestingly, when I was doing writing science fiction, I tried to write a novel. I got the novel finished. But during writing the novel, one of my issues was, okay, so I have this, you know, very, very billion-year-old sort of civilization, you know, what would their philosophy be? You know, sort of what would their approach to life be? And I tried to think back on the philosophy that I had done and try to figure out what the wisest kind of approach to life would be. Not to denigrate anything in the Western tradition, because there's a lot of great philosophy in the Western tradition, very wise teaching. My feeling was that any society that had managed to live that long would have been probably organized around Buddhist principles in some sense. They would have understood the notions that were central to Buddhism. And that brought me back into Buddhism and into the practice. Also, I think it really helped to read Batchelor's Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, because that came at a time in my life when I was also very involved in the secular skeptics community, and at the same time feeling that there was a kind of, at least for my psychological makeup, a kind of corrosive negativism to it. I think some people can overcome that, but for an introverted kind of bookish person like me, focusing always on criticizing other people ended up being kind of depressing. Although I did write some stuff, you know, skeptical articles and so on, I began to feel that there was something unkind about it. Now, I mean, of course, it's also got a very deep ethical component, you know, to correcting errors that other people make, and that, you know, a lot of the skeptics community does help to foster a more enlightened kind of approach to reality. But in practice, it ended up, at least for me, as I say, to feel kind of corrosive. So I felt like I needed a real practice of fostering kindness, as well as knowledge. Of course, knowledge is very, very important, but wisdom, the Buddhist wisdom in particular, but wisdom in general, is more than just knowledge. It's really not just knowing the facts, but knowing what the important facts are, and knowing when a fact may be true, or when a claim may be false, but when it doesn't really matter. So in any event, I wrote this novel, this science fiction novel, which ended up not really going anywhere. I sent it out to a bunch of people. Nobody really responded, so It's, sort of sitting in the computer bookshelf somewhere. But when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, do I want to write a second one? Because I know that people, whenever I undertake something, I try to do all the reading I can, and there's so much information out there on the internet now about everything that I learned an awful lot about the writing career. And in particular, I learned that almost nobody gets a first novel published. Successful novelists end up writing 3, 4, 5, even more novels before they get to a skill level where they can actually get something published. And so the question was, did I want to continue to work at that, writing maybe a second one or a third one? And then there was the question of, okay, if I put all this time and effort, eventually I'm going to have to get an agent. And what is the agent going to look for? And I'd read a lot of agents' blogs and so on, and found that really what they want, as much as anything, is an author who's willing to spend a significant portion of the year traveling, going to conferences, giving talks, giving readings. I'm, as I say, a very, very introverted person. I have a small group of friends that I'm very close to, but the idea of spending any time really traveling to conferences with large groups of people and giving public talks was something that I had no real interest in, and still have no real interest in. I did a PhD in philosophy. One of the reasons I didn't really take to it was that I didn't love the teaching. I don't love getting up in front of large audiences. I don't like public speaking at all. And I know that's true of many people, but it's maybe sound weird. Somebody who's got a YouTube channel now, but we'll get to that in any event. But having learned, of course I knew about Buddhism from before, from when I was doing undergraduate and graduate work. But having gotten back into it and, really interested in it, I began to, discover that there's a lot of material out there, especially in the early Buddhist material, that's really not well known and not well understood. And I felt like, okay, there's something I can offer here. I can try to teach it. But I don't love sitting in front of large audiences or standing and talking. So the idea of leading sort of Dharma classes doesn't really interest me. On the other hand, sitting in front of a camera, which is where you guys are, right? That's easier for me. Okay, some people say, oh, it's easy. Try to make friends with the camera. Think that there's lots of people out there and it's not just a camera. For me, it's sort of easier to think it's just a camera, right? And even then, it's hard, right? Sometimes I'll do numerous takes of something. You don't see the stuff I throw away that I don't like. I get nervous even in front of a camera. I want to make it as good as possible. And I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I'm sometimes close to a perfectionist. And anyway, so in lots of ways I think I'm absolutely crazy to be doing this, given how sort of generally private and introverted I am. My feeling is that not only do I need to practice a way of becoming kinder, because when I was in school, I was always interested in argument. In graduate school, argument is sort of the heart of that kind of study. But I think kindness is a better route, and I need to practice. And it's one of the hardest practices for me. A metta practice for me is very difficult. So yeah, kindness is really, really important to practice if you feel that or I should say, I feel that I'm deficient in it in many ways, so it's something I need to practice. And maybe you agree, or find that in your life. Stress, is something that's been with me all my life. I tend to be somebody who doesn't deal well with stress. As I say, being in large crowds, being in public, speaking in public, stresses me out. I don't like it. And that's only on the very, very high end, but there's lower level stresses that I think we need to all deal with. I know I need to deal with. So a practice that helps me deal with stress is great. And I found meditative practice to be invaluable in that regard. And finally, wisdom. From a philosophical background, I feel like I've always been interested in wisdom and trying to understand what the good life was and how to live a life that was balanced in some sense. But wisdom, I think now, is even more important in a global scale, on a national scale, because there's so much damage that we can do and are doing as a society, because with the growth of science and with the growth of knowledge, as people, we have more power to do ill and good. And as societies and as a global culture, we have infinitely more power to do evil and good. Global warming is just one example of this. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if we come at it unwisely. So for these three reasons, the reasons of helping to promote kindness, of helping to alleviate stress on a daily level, and helping to promote wisdom, that's what got me sort of back involved. Not wanting to teach in front of large audiences, I literally spent months and months trying to think about how to do this properly, and then YouTube seemed like a good option. And I'm still learning how to deal with this. I mean, how to do this properly. When I look at, I try to look at my statistics of my videos, and I know one of the things that comes up for me a lot is that there aren't many women watching. It's mostly men. And that's troubling to me, and I wonder what the reason is for that. And if you guys have any comments, I'd be interested to know. Otherwise, it's difficult for me to give these. It's difficult for me to sort of come out in public and give talks like these. But I hope that they're useful. And they're useful in a sense for me, just to sort of, even if they're not useful for many people, I feel like just coming out in front of a camera and trying to give a talk on something rather than write it down is helpful for me. Writing is a very solitary pursuit, and it tends to get me into issues of, the sort of finer details of views and nitty-gritty of stuff that sort of, I think, takes me more out of really lived experience in the way that a talk doesn't. So anyway, that's a little bit of, sort of where I come from, my background. And I hope it was useful for you. As I say, this is this whole thing is an experiment. This particular talk is an experiment. Let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoy these. And if you do enjoy them, I hope you'll subscribe. So really, really glad that all of you guys are out there. New folks, this is an unusual talk. So if you're new to the channel, then maybe check out some of the other ones. For you guys coming back, thanks so much. I'm really, really glad you're here. So catch you on the next one.